The desert wind screamed across sagebrush wells, turning noon into a red twilight. A German shepherd named Ranger cut through the storm like a bullet made of faith, paws tearing the dunes apart where the sand still whispered of something alive. Beneath that burning ocean, 3 tiny whimpers trembled against the wrath of summer. No one knew they were there. No one but a man who had once survived another kind of war. Jack Hayes, a Marine who carried one unbreakable vow: never leave the helpless behind. The dog didn't smell death. He smelled hope. And what they pulled from that desert grave would test the soul of every man who'd ever known loss. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. And if you believe no creature should be abandoned to the storm, hit subscribe and join us by the campfire. Because tonight, under the burning sky of New Mexico, a soldier and his dog are about to rewrite what mercy means. The sun had become a god of fire over Sagebrush Wells, and every inch of the desert burned beneath it. The small frontier town lay crouched under a bruised sky, its wooden roofs coated in red dust, its windows half blinded by sand. The air trembled with heat, the kind that made metal groan and cattle bawl. In the far distance, the horizon was no longer a line but a storm, a living wall of flame-colored dust rolling closer, swallowing everything it touched. On the northern ridge, Jack Hayes stood beside the creaking skeleton of a windmill, his face a landscape carved by war and weather. He was in his late 30s, tall and lean, his frame wiry, like the mesquite trees that refuse to die no matter how harsh the drought. A short beard shaded his jaw, streaked with early gray. His eyes, steel blue and steady, belonged to a man who'd seen too many things collapse and still stood anyway. Scars lined his forearms like old stories no one wanted to tell, and though his voice was calm, there was something brittle beneath it, something that snapped only in silence. At his feet crouched Ranger, a 5-year-old German shepherd, his black and tan coat streaked with desert dust, amber eyes bright and alert. His left ear bore a notch from a gunfight long past, and a faint scar cut through the fur along his shoulder. A reminder of shrapnel from Afghanistan, where both man and dog had learned the same command: survive first, heal later. Ranger's nose twitched, and his body stiffened, tail low but quivering. Jack squinted into the rising storm. "You smelling trouble, boy?" The dog didn't answer. He never needed to. One paw pressed forward, claws scraping grit, then another, until suddenly Ranger bolted down the dune, barking once, sharp and urgent. Jack cursed under his breath and followed, boots sinking deep into the shifting sand. The wind picked up, howling like a dying engine, driving grit against his face. When he reached Ranger, the dog was already digging, forelegs blurring, sand flying in furious sprays. Something small and pitiful whimpered beneath the surface. "Easy, easy." Jack dropped to his knees, scooping with his bare hands. The sand was hot enough to burn, but he didn't stop. A few inches down, a patch of matted fur appeared, then another. He brushed faster, uncovering 3 tiny German shepherd pups, barely breathing, their eyes sealed with crusted dust. One was dark as coal. That was Sable, twitching weakly but stubbornly refusing to go still. Another, Echo, lighter with the faint stripe of silver on his back, pawed at the air as if chasing a dream. The smallest, Scout, trembled but stared blindly toward Ranger, nose twitching to the sound of the older dog's low growl. Timid yet somehow aware, Jack's breath caught. "What in God's name?" He slipped off his coat, rough and worn from years of travel, wrapping the pups inside. Their tiny bodies fit in his palms, hot and cold, all at once. He pressed them against his chest, muttering, "Born in hell's breath, huh? Guess that makes you fighters." Ranger whined softly, brushing his muzzle against Jack's knee, eyes flicking between his master and the shifting dunes. Thunder cracked. Not from the sky, but from the storm's heart. The haboob roared in, swallowing the ridge in a blood-red haze. Jack rose, cradling the pups, his hat torn away by the gale. He could barely see beyond 10 feet, but he knew the path down to the abandoned corral by memory. "Come on, Ranger!" he shouted over the storm. The dog pressed close, guiding him through the chaos like a living compass. They stumbled through the dying light, wind slicing at their clothes, sand biting like glass. The faint outline of Sagebrush Wells flickered in the distance. Crooked fences, a church steeple half buried, the ghost of a town still clinging to life. Jack's boots struck wood. The corral gate. Just as a low growl rolled through the wind, Ranger stopped cold, ears pricked, body rigid. Out of the storm's throat came the rhythm of hooves, slow, deliberate, like a drumbeat of doom. Then a voice, high and sharp, cut through the dust. "Well, well, what do we have here?" Jack turned. A horseman emerged from the swirling red mist, tall in the saddle, his duster coat snapping like a flag. His face was narrow, fox-like, with a thin scar running from cheek to chin. His hat sat low, shadowing eyes that glinted with the kind of cruelty that grew rich in lawless towns. This was Mac Doyle, foreman and hired gun of the Pike Ranch, a man whose smile never reached his eyes. He chewed a toothpick, voice oily with mockery. "Those pups," he said, pointing the barrel of his revolver toward Jack's coat, "don't belong to you. They're property of Mr. Harlan Pike, and you just dug up his investment." Jack's jaw tightened. He could feel the pups squirming faintly against his chest. "Funny," he said evenly. "I didn't see Pike's brand on their hides." Mac chuckled, spitting dust. "You don't need a brand when you own the town, soldier boy." Ranger stepped forward, fur bristling, a low growl rumbling like thunder. Mac cocked his revolver, but the wind howled so loud the click was swallowed. The storm twisted around them, red sand spinning like smoke from the devil's pipe. Jack's voice dropped low. "You tell Pike he wants what's buried. He can come dig it himself." The horse reared, Mac's face half lit by lightning that flashed deep inside the storm. "He will," Mac said, lips curling into a grin. "And when he does, you'll wish you'd left them under the sand." Another gust hit, fierce, hot, suffocating. Jack blinked through it, and when his vision cleared, Mac was gone, swallowed by the crimson haze. Only the echo of hoofbeats lingered, fading into the storm. Ranger growled once, then turned toward town, tail stiff, waiting for command. Jack exhaled slowly, heart pounding. "Yeah, boy," he murmured. "Looks like we just stepped into someone else's war." Behind him, the sky boiled red, and somewhere deep in the dunes the wind carried a cry. Half animal, half omen. The storm wasn't done with them yet. The storm broke at dawn, leaving Sagebrush Wells in ruins of silence and dust. The air smelled of scorched earth and rusted tin. Half the main street was buried in dunes, and the other half glimmered faintly under the new sun. Like the desert itself couldn't decide if it wanted to live or die. Jack Hayes trudged through the broken alleys with Ranger padding close beside him, carrying the faint squeaks of the 3 rescued pups swaddled in his old jacket. Each step left a print half filled with sand before the wind erased it. The town was still asleep, or pretending to be. At the end of the street stood Sarah Miller's boarding house, a 2-story building that had once been white but now carried the dull hue of old bone. The front porch sagged slightly, and a wooden sign creaked in the wind. Rooms for travelers, warm meals, and honest beds. Jack pushed the door open. Inside, warmth rolled out like mercy. Sarah Miller looked up from behind the counter, a dish towel in hand. She was around 35, tall but slender, with sun-browned skin and hair the color of chestnut, tied back in a simple bun. Her face was neither soft nor hard, the kind carved by time, sorrow, and persistence. Her husband had died 6 years earlier in a mining collapse north of Santa Fe, and since then she'd run this place alone, holding the town together with quiet stubbornness. Her brown eyes were sharp yet kind, and when she saw the bundle in Jack's arms, she frowned softly. "Lord above, Jack, what have you got there? Looks like trouble in triplicate." "Found them under the dunes," Jack said, voice rough, barely breathing. Sarah dropped her towel and ushered him toward the hearth. "Set them here. I'll fetch hot water." She moved quickly the way people do when they've lost before and refuse to lose again. Ranger followed, lying down close enough that the pups could feel his heat. Sarah returned with a pot of steaming water, some cloth, and a battered tin mug. "Here," she said. "Wipe 'em down slow. Don't shock their hearts." A door creaked open upstairs. Boots thudded softly, and a new voice called down, calm and deliberate. "That dog again, Mr. Hayes?" Dr. Lena Foster descended the stairs, her satchel in one hand. She was in her early 40s, tall, composed, her posture military straight. A faded scar ran along her wrist, a souvenir from a surgical knife slipped in haste years ago. She'd served as a field medic during the war before settling in Sagebrush Wells, where she became the only doctor and veterinarian for 50 miles. Her gray eyes held the patience of someone who'd stitched more wounds than she'd spoken prayers for. Jack rose slightly. Didn't mean to wake you, Doc. Got 3 small ones here who didn't pick a good night to be born. Lena knelt by the pups. Her hands, though calloused, were gentle. Desert births never are, she murmured. They're dehydrated. Don't feed them. Milk yet. They'll choke. Warm them first. Slow. Gradual. She glanced at Jack and added, You look half dead yourself. Storm'll do that, he said dryly. Sarah had already lit the old coal stove. The fire crackled, painting the room in gold and amber. The pups stirred. Sable, the biggest, gave a raspy wheeze. Echo chewed weakly on the end of Jack's bootlace, determined to taste the world. Scout, the smallest, nestled against Ranger's chest, his tiny paws rising and falling with the older dog's steady rhythm. Guess they think he's their mother, Sarah said softly. Ranger flicked an ear but didn't move, eyes watchful as the pups squirmed. Jack smiled faintly. Could do worse. By midday, the storm outside had died completely. The desert shimmered like glass, and the wind carried whispers instead of screams. The boarding house had filled with the faint hum of life again, a pot simmering on the stove, Ranger's tail brushing the floor, Sarah's quiet humming as she mixed a bowl of oats and sugar water. But peace in Sagebrush Wells never lasted. The first sign was the sound of spurs, slow, deliberate, echoing off the boardwalk. Then came the knock. 3 hard raps on the wooden frame, like the desert demanding entry. Sarah's humming stopped. She opened the door just enough to see a tall man in a long gray duster, sunburned face sharp as stone. Mac Doyle. Behind him stood 5 armed riders, dust masks hanging from their necks, each with a rifle slung low and easy. Mac's grin was thin as wire. Afternoon, Mrs. Miller, he drawled. I'd tip my hat, but this ain't exactly a social call. He flicked a folded paper toward the counter. Word from Mr. Pike. He says you've got something that don't belong to you. Sarah didn't touch the paper. You can tell Mr. Pike I don't keep what ain't mine. Only guests and hungry mouths here. Mac stepped forward, his boots thudding slow on the floorboards. Funny, 'cause rumor says a certain ex-Marine brought in 3 shepherd pups last night, and rumor's usually right when it pays good. His eyes shifted toward the fire, where Ranger had risen, head low, teeth bared in a silent snarl. Jack moved between them. His voice was low but iron hard. You got Pike's message. Now you've delivered it. Ride home. Mac's hand hovered over his gun. You don't want to test who owns this town, soldier. Already did, Jack said. Didn't much like the answer. The air thickened. Even the fire seemed to hush. One of the riders outside coughed nervously. Mac's eyes flicked toward him, then back to Jack. He spat, the sound sharp as a shot. Before the sun drops behind them hills, you bring those dogs to Pike's ranch. They're registered stock, bred for tracking and trained for one purpose. Profit. Keep 'em and you'll wish the sand had buried you too. He turned, coat snapping behind him, and mounted his horse. The other riders followed, their silhouettes fading into the red glare of sunset. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Sarah exhaled shakily, clutching the doorframe. He means it, Jack. Pike's men burn what they can't buy. Jack's eyes moved to the window where the horizon bled crimson. The pups whimpered in their sleep. Ranger stood guard by the cradle, tail still, gaze fixed on the fading sun. Jack's hand brushed the revolver on his belt, then rested over his heart, where the 3 tiny heartbeats still trembled beneath his coat. Let him come, he said quietly, but he'll find I don't surrender easy. Outside, the light bent low and gold across the desert. The sun kissed the edge of the hills. And in that brief, burning silence, something in the wind shifted. The first promise of war. Morning came hard to Sagebrush Wells. The desert light was pale and pitiless, turning the town's broken fences into skeletal fingers, pointing toward a sun that had no mercy to spare. Inside Sarah Miller's boarding house, the air smelled of ash and coffee grounds. The fire in the stove had burned low, and the only sound was the steady breathing of the dogs. Jack Hayes sat by the window, shirt sleeves rolled up, his hands tracing lines across a torn map. Outside, dust devils spun like ghosts between the buildings. The pups were awake now. Sable, the largest, already barked at his reflection in a tin bowl. Determined and headstrong, Echo pawed at the edge of Sarah's dress, tail wagging with reckless joy. Scout, the quiet one, crept beneath the table and hid in the shadows, eyes wide and thoughtful. Ranger, their watchful mentor, stood near the door, muscles coiled and eyes alert, his gaze moving from Jack to the window, reading the morning as if it were a battlefield. Jack rubbed his temples. If Pike's men come before noon, we won't have much time. Sarah appeared from the kitchen with a tin of biscuits. Her hair, now loose from its bun, framed her tired face. You're not thinking of waiting for them, are you? I'm thinking of running, Jack said, but not blind. At that, Dr. Lena Foster entered, her long coat dusted with red sand. She looked like she hadn't slept, her gray eyes sharp but weary. The storm's cleared enough for travel, she said, dropping a folded parchment onto the table. This map marks the old Coyote Pass. It'll take you out of Pike's land if you move fast, but you'll need to train the dogs first. That canyon's narrow and full of drop-offs. One mistake and you'll vanish into stone. Jack scanned the map, tracing the jagged lines. We'll make it, he said. Lena tilted her head, half amused, half admiring. You sound like a man who's planning to survive out of pure stubbornness. Usually works, Jack replied, rising. Come on, Ranger. Class is in session. They stepped into the blinding sunlight behind the boarding house. The yard was little more than sand and broken fence, but it would do. Ranger barked once, sharp and commanding. Sarah stood at the doorway, arms crossed, watching as Jack tore a strip of cloth from his sleeve and handed it to her. Mint oil, he said. The smell guide them. She dipped it in a jar, the scent cutting through the dry air. Jack tied the cloth to a stick and drove it into the ground 30 paces away. All right, Ranger, show them. The older shepherd padded forward, nose to the wind, then dropped low and moved in smooth arcs, tail stiff. The pups watched, heads cocked, eyes wide. When Ranger barked twice, Jack clapped once. Go! Sable charged first, paws flinging sand behind him. Echo followed, tripping halfway, rolling once before bouncing back up. Scout hesitated, then crept along the shadows of the fence, cautious but precise. They reached the stick, sniffed furiously, and barked as if they'd conquered the desert itself. Sarah laughed, the sound bright against the desolation. You might have soldiers yet. By noon, the lessons grew harder. Jack wrapped Sable loosely in a cloth to teach him patience. The pup growled but eventually stilled, eyes blinking slow with reluctant calm. Echo learned to bark once for danger, twice for clear. A rhythm born of war turned to play. Scout, smallest and sharpest, learned to vanish, crouching low in the shadows until only the flicker of his tail betrayed him. Good, Jack said softly. If we're lucky, these tricks will save us. Just then, Echo lunged for Jack's bootlace, teeth flashing. The leather snapped. Jack stumbled, arms windmilling before landing hard in the sand. For one breathless second, silence. Then Sarah laughed so hard she had to wipe her eyes. Even Lena smiled, though she quickly hid it behind a cough. Jack sat up, brushing dust off his shirt. Guess that's what I get for teaching with my shoes on. The sound of laughter drifted like a fragile promise. Brief, but alive. Then the wind shifted. The mirage shimmered on the horizon, and a tremor ran through the sand. Faint at first, then stronger. The air thickened, heavy and electric. Ranger froze, ears pricked. The pups whined and pressed close to him. Lena looked east. Another storm, she whispered. No, Jack said, eyes narrowing. It's too soon. The wind's coming from the north this time. A low hum filled the air, growing into a roar. Dust swirled upward like a curtain, and the church bell on Main Street began to clang wildly, its sound swallowed almost immediately by the wind. The light turned copper, then blood red. Move, Jack shouted. Lena grabbed the map and supplies. Sarah wrapped the pups in her shawl. Jack led them toward the edge of town, where the dry riverbed cut through the hills, the start of Coyote Pass. They scrambled down, the world behind them dissolving into a wall of sand and fire. Inside the canyon, the air was cooler but tense. The cliffs rose like teeth, jagged and close. Jack lit a small lantern, the glow trembling in the wind. Stay close, he warned. They wound through narrow turns, the sound of distant thunder rolling above. Halfway through, Ranger stopped dead, growling low. Jack raised the lantern and froze. On the ridge above, a lantern flared to life, then another, and another. Mac Doyle's voice echoed down, cruel and amused. Told you the boss don't like thieves, Hayes. More lights blinked into being, riders on both sides of the canyon, their guns glinting. From above, a wooden crate teetered on the ledge, marked in bold black letters, Dynamite. Jack's pulse spiked. Sarah gasped. Ranger barked once, sharp, urgent. Jack's voice dropped to a whisper, barely audible over the rising wind. Get down! The crate began to fall. The crate hit the rocks with a dull crack, splinters flying, And in that single heartbeat, Jack Hayes saw the word dynamite blur through the dust. "Down!" he roared. Ranger leapt, slamming into the crate, shoving it toward a damp hollow under the cliff wall. The explosion bloomed like thunder trapped in stone, muffled but brutal. The canyon shook. Sand and debris poured down in sheets, swallowing the world in sound. When the roar faded, only the rasp of breathing remained. Jack coughed through the haze, eyes burning. Sarah Miller huddled close, clutching the shawl that held the pups. Dr. Lena Foster, her face streaked with soot, steadied herself against the wall. The pups whimpered in her arms, alive but terrified. "Everyone in one piece," Jack rasped. Ranger barked once in answer. Then, suddenly, Sable, the boldest of the pups, let out a sharp bark that echoed through the cavern. Jack turned. On the far wall, faint sparks flared and fizzled, a second fuse winding upward along a timber brace toward the ceiling. "Hell," Jack muttered. "They've planted another." Without hesitation, Echo, light and quick, darted from Sarah's arms. The pup's fur glinted under the swinging lantern light as he disappeared into the wooden scaffolding. "Echo!" Jack shouted, but the dog was already scrambling, teeth finding the fuse. A short yelp, a tug, then a sharp snap. The line broke, sparks hissing into darkness. Echo slid back down, paws first, landing with a graceless thump. Sarah exhaled shakily. "He's got more sense than half the men in this town." But Scout, the smallest, froze suddenly, ears twitching. A distant rumble, soft, wet, and deep. Ranger growled low, nose to the ground. "Water," Foster said grimly. "The storm runoff from the mountains. It's coming through the old shafts." Jack glanced around, eyes tracing the narrow tunnel to their right. The entrance to an abandoned mining corridor, once dug for copper decades ago, now half collapsed and slick with mud. "We head that way," he ordered. "Move. Now." They ran. The walls groaned, dust falling like snow. Ranger took point, nose pressed low, guiding through the twisting dark. Behind him, Sarah stumbled, skirts dragging, clutching the pups against her chest. Foster followed, lantern shaking in her hand. The smell of wet earth grew thick, and somewhere behind them came the echo of voices. Mac Doyle's men shouting, boots clanging against stone. "Spread out! They're in the shaft!" a voice bellowed. Ranger turned sharply, barking into the tunnel mouth. The sound bounced off the rock in waves. A dozen echoes splitting in all directions. The gunmen fired into the darkness, bullets whining off stone. "He's confusing their aim," Foster whispered. "Smart animal." Jack ducked as splinters flew. "He's more soldier than most I've known." They pressed deeper into the mine. The air grew heavy, the ceiling lower. Lantern light caught the shimmer of old tools rusting in the mud. Picks, rails, broken helmets. Then, a creak, a groan. Jack froze. Overhead, the support beams, black with age and rain, began to bend. "Keep moving," he shouted, but the warning came too late. A crack split the dark. The ceiling collapsed in a roar of splintering timber and dust. Jack threw his arms over Foster, shoving her forward, but the falling beam smashed between them, splitting the group. He coughed hard, vision spinning. "Sarah! Lena! Jack!" Sarah's voice came faintly, muffled by the wall of rock now sealing the tunnel. On her side, the water was rising fast, swirling around her boots. She held the pups high, her shawl soaked. Foster gripped her shoulder, face pale. "It's flash flood runoff," she said quickly. "We have minutes, maybe less." Jack beat at the fallen planks, fists bleeding. "Hold on, we'll dig through." On his side, the air was dry but thick with smoke and dust. Ranger barked furiously, clawing at the debris, teeth pulling at splinters. "Easy, boy," Jack panted. "We'll get to him." But as he spoke, a new sound slithered through the dark. A slow, deliberate clop of hooves above the cave mouth. Jack froze. The echo carried through the hollow chamber like the toll of a church bell. He stepped back, listening. The hooves stopped. Then a voice, smooth, deep, and lazy as whiskey on ice. "Well, well," it drawled. "Didn't expect you to crawl into your own grave, Hayes." Jack's stomach tightened. He knew that voice. It was Harlan Pike himself. Pike was a man who filled the space around him like smoke. In his 50s, broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, with hair gone silver at the temples and eyes the color of dried blood. He wore a dark vest of imported leather, gold chain glinting across his chest, and a wide-brimmed black hat that shadowed most of his face. Years of ranch wealth and blood deals had carved him into a figure of calm menace. He was the kind who smiled while ordering a man's ruin. "Mr. Doyle says you've been busy," Pike continued, his tone soft but venomous. "Stealing what ain't yours, killing my men, and now hiding underground like a rat. Tell me, soldier, is this the honor they taught you in uniform?" Jack stared up through the half-collapsed shaft, his jaw set. "You sent your dogs first. Don't be shocked they bit back." Pike chuckled, dismounting with a slow, deliberate grace. "You're quick with words, Hayes, but I've got quicker ways to end a problem." Metal rasped as he drew his revolver. "Maybe I'll just block this cave. Let time do the dirty work." Ranger growled, eyes locked on the shadow above. Down the tunnel, water rose to Sarah's waist. The pups whimpered, claws scratching against her arms. Foster tried to brace against the current, her voice sharp with command. "Sarah, climb! Get the little ones higher!" They scrambled onto a ledge barely out of reach of the torrent. The lantern flickered, then died. Jack swung his rifle upward, firing once toward the light above. The bullet ricocheted off stone, showering sparks. Pike's silhouette flinched, then vanished from view. "Ranger!" Jack shouted. "Find another way!" The shepherd bolted down a side tunnel, barking into the dark. Jack followed, ducking low as more rock fell. Behind him he could hear the dull roar of water crashing against the barrier, and Sarah's faint cry through the stone. Then the rumble deepened, the sound of something breaking far below. The mine floor quivered underfoot. Jack spun just in time to see the lower shaft flooding like a black river. Ranger barked again, leading him upward toward a faint glimmer of light. But above the roaring chaos, a shadow moved across the cave mouth, Pike's silhouette, backlit by the blood-red sky. The brim of his hat tilted down as he watched the flood swallow the mountain. He smiled once, faintly, then spurred his horse. The desert night had no mercy. It wrapped Sagebrush Wells in a furnace of still heat and the reek of sulfur. Above the collapsed mine mouth, Harlan Pike sat tall in his saddle, the firelight from his lanterns painting him in bronze and shadow. The storm had passed, but the air still pulsed with the threat of thunder. Around him, his riders stood silent, faces hidden under wide hats, rifles resting easy but ready. Pike tossed a grease-stained leather satchel down the slope. It landed near the rubble with a heavy thud. "There's your choice, Hayes," he called, voice steady as steel. "Inside's the transfer deed to the town's well, the same one your little friends in there drink from. Hand over the pups and I give Sagebrush Wells its water back. You keep 'em, and I'll burn this hole shut." Below in the trembling dark, Jack Hayes stood ankle-deep in rising floodwater. The air was thick with mud and smoke. His shirt clung to him, torn and streaked with ash. "You hear that, boy?" he murmured. "He thinks this town's soul can be traded for paper." Ranger, his German shepherd, growled low, amber eyes gleaming through the gloom. Around them, the pups whimpered. Sable, stubborn and strong, pressed his body against Scout to keep her steady, while Echo, sharp-eared and restless, sniffed at something in the rock. Jack turned to Sarah Miller, who clutched the soaked shawl around the pups, her face pale in the lantern's ghostly light. "He's bluffing," she whispered. "He won't destroy the only way down." "He's Pike," Dr. Lena Foster said quietly, wringing out her sleeves. "Men like him don't bluff. They build their own laws." Then, from the far corner of the flooded shaft, Scout let out a sharp whine and pawed at the rock wall. A faint glint caught Jack's eye, a scrap of oiled leather wedged deep in the crack. "What's that you found, girl?" he muttered. He pried it loose and unfolded it under the flickering light. Inside were two objects, an aged parchment map and a small black ledger bound with wax thread. The map, yellowed and brittle, showed the outline of an older well, long forgotten, one carved before Pike's family ever claimed the land. The ledger, however, was something else entirely. Page after page of debts, forged deeds, and signatures. Proof that Pike's fortune was built on lies. Jack looked up sharply. This could clear the town. Everything he's taken, every deal he's buried, it's all in here. Sable gave a bark as if to answer. Echo, tail rigid, turned his head toward the slope above. The faint hiss of a match striking drifted through the cracks. "Damn," Jack hissed. "He's lighting the fuse." The faint sound of Pike's voice filtered down, calm and cruel. "You've got 1 minute, soldier. Trade or burn." Jack's mind raced. "Ranger," he said, voice low, "fetch the satchel, up top." The shepherd's ears twitched. He barked once in acknowledgement. Echo barked 3 times in quick rhythm, their signal, and Ranger answered with a deep, rolling growl that trembled through the walls. Sarah stared, realization dawning. "You're going after him." Jack's jaw set. "I'm going through him." He holstered his revolver, checked the chamber. 1 bullet left. The floodwater had climbed to his knees. The ceiling groaned. He looked back at the women and pups. "Keep them on the ledge," he ordered. "If I'm not back, head east when the wall breaks. Follow the old water vein. It'll lead you out." "Jack," Sarah started, but he was already moving. He tore off his belt and looped it around a cracked support beam, wedging his Colt revolver into the joint. With a grunt, he pulled. The metal creaked, wood split, and a narrow gap in the ceiling opened, barely wide enough for a man. Fresh air rushed in, hot and heavy with the smell of burning pitch. Ranger leapt first, claws catching in the rock. Then Sable, Echo, and Scout scrambled after him, small bodies vanishing into the light above. Jack hauled himself up next, muscles screaming, emerging into the open desert air, straight beneath Pike's horse. For a breath, both men froze, soldiers and tyrant, eye to eye beneath the blood-red sky. Pike's face was unreadable, carved in shadow. "You should have taken the deal," he said softly. The match in his hand hissed down to the fuse line, snaking toward the dynamite stacked at the tunnel's mouth. Jack didn't wait. "Ranger, now!" The shepherd lunged from the dust, slamming into Pike's arm. The revolver clattered away as the fuse sparked to life, curling like a live snake. Echo darted forward, grabbing the smoldering line between his teeth, tugging it toward the wet sand while Sable snapped at Pike's boot. Scout darted between them, barking wildly. Jack lunged for the match, but Pike's fist met his jaw, sending him sprawling. The fuse sizzled, half buried in mud, flame sputtering, but alive. Pike grabbed his gun again, panting. "You can't stop it," he growled. "You'll bury yourself trying." Jack wiped blood from his mouth, eyes blazing. "Maybe, but you're coming with me." He kicked forward, grappling with Pike, both men tumbling toward the edge. Ranger seized Pike's sleeve, teeth sinking deep. The world narrowed to firelight, grit, and heartbeat. Below, Sarah and Lena shielded the pups as the tunnel shook. Water roared. A final bark cut through the chaos. Rangers, deep and defiant. Before the blast consumed the night. Light, heat, silence. And then, nothing. When the dust of Sagebrush Wells finally settled, the desert grew quiet again. Not with defeat, but with grace. Out of that storm of greed and fire, 3 small hearts had lived, and through them hope had been reborn. Maybe the miracle wasn't in the thunder or the blaze, but in the courage of a man, a loyal dog, and the tiny lives they refused to abandon. Some folks say they saw Ranger again, standing on the ridge at sunrise, watching the town breathe anew beside a freshly dug well, water glimmering like liquid light. Others say the wind still carries his bark through the canyons, a reminder that faith doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through the smallest acts of love. And maybe that's the real lesson God leaves us with, that miracles don't always fall from heaven. Sometimes they crawl out of the sand, trembling, dirty, and alive, waiting for a heart kind enough to lift them up. If this story touched you, if you've ever believed that kindness can save, that no soul, man or beast, should be left behind, then share it. Leave a prayer in the comments for those still fighting their own deserts. And don't forget to subscribe so you can join us again by the campfire. May the Lord bless you, keep you safe, and remind you, even in the darkest storms, His mercy still runs deeper than the sand.